Touchdown! It's one of the most well-known stats in sports, and it's one of the main ways we judge players and teams by how well they create them, or how many they allow the other team to score. But specifically, the quarterback, the leader of the team, is the one who creates them the most through the air with a passing touchdown, and even the greats couldn't consistently have more than 2 a game. But this video is going to go over the almost 100-year-long standing single-game record, and the absurd 7 times this record has been tied throughout the last 8 decades. And if you enjoy the NFL and like watching videos like this about records, team history, things like, that are not really talked about as much, that's definitely the content I'm going to be trying to bring on this channel. Stuff that I would like to watch myself, and so, if you think this is something you would like to indulge in, then definitely think about subscribing. And yeah, let's get on to the video. On November 14th, 1943, Sid Luckman of the Chicago Bears played the New York Giants and absolutely dominated, setting an NFL record with both 7 passing touchdowns and 400 passing yards, which were both single-game records at the time. But almost shockingly, this record has been tied 7 times, but never broken in almost 8 decades. Luckman was one of the greatest players of his own era and won 4 NFL championships and 1 MVP in his 11-year career, but was never able to come close to breaking his own record in the time he played. Luckman and the Chicago Bears were regarded as some of the greatest teams in NFL history in its early eras, but a lot has changed in the game since then. And some of the greats in the NFL right now, like Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady, and many others, who are in a much, much, much more pass-heavy era, have not even come close to breaking it. Some have, some haven't, but we will get to that on the rest of it. The next time 7 touchdown passes in a single game happened was on October 17th, 1954, by Adrian Burk. Probably one of the least notable quarterbacks on this list, but on this October day in Philadelphia, Adrian Burk was able to have himself a game, and quite a historic one at that. The Eagles won 49-21 in absolute dominant fashion, but Burk also did not seem to get the same praise as Luckman got 11 years prior, due to the fact that the performance had just tied the record and was still obviously incredible, but it wasn't record-setting in 1954, but NFL fans had no idea how long it would truly take for this record to be toppled at all. It was a chilly November day in Houston in 1961 when George Blanda went ballistic for 7 touchdowns, absolutely entertaining and amazing the whole entire home crowd for 60 minutes. But there's something even crazier about this record, as Blanda was also the team's kicker, ended up scoring every single extra point himself. This 1961 season was also a year where Blanda set an NFL single-season record of 36 passing touchdowns, while also being the team's full-time kicker. For these Oilers, he had one of the most insane, never-before-seen careers in NFL history, as he played a whopping 26 seasons from 1949 till 1975, and he scored over 200 passing touchdowns, over 300 field goals, and almost 1,000 extra points in that time, being known as one of the most versatile players in the history of the NFL, and having one of the most interesting, successful, but weird careers to ever be seen to that point, and honestly, in the history of the NFL. The next quarterback to touch this record and tie it at 7 touchdowns in one night is Y.A. Tittle. And this would be the 3rd time this record was tied. In 1963, Y.A. Tittle was known as one of the greatest passers in the NFL, and his New York Football Giants were able to go off en route to a 49-34 win versus the Redskins. 2nd time they got this done to them, by the way, so far. And he was probably the player who was closest to breaking it at this point. He scored only 1 time in the 4th quarter, but 6 throughout the first 3 periods, and could have had the record if they had kept a foot on the gas, but no one could blame him, as they won the game pretty convincingly. And Y.A. Tittle, like I said, was one of the most well-known passers of his era. Obviously there's Broadway Joe and a whole lot of other great QBs from that era, but Tittle was definitely ahead of his time. The fifth person to throw 4 7-touchdown passes and the fourth to tie it since Sid Luckman had originally set the record is Joe Kapp. And the funny thing about Joe Kapp is he might actually be the most interesting quarterback on this list because he was downright terrible. He was probably one of the worst QBs to ever play the game, but he had a game where he was absolutely magical. As Joe Kapp of the Minnesota Vikings, who retired with a touchdown-interception ratio of, get this, 40 touchdowns to 64 interceptions. And if you're still watching this video at this point, you should know that is absolutely terrible. If any quarterback did that in today's game, they would be crucified, and they'd probably be worse than crucified. They actually probably wouldn't be in the NFL anymore after, 64 interceptions, but to only 40 touchdowns. But in his only year we had a positive touchdown or interception ratio, he actually ended up setting the single game NFL record, tying the 7 touchdown passes, where he absolutely torched the Baltimore Colts on September 28th of that year, 1969. And this game was probably the only notable thing about Kapp's career that was positive whatsoever. And probably by far the worst quarterback on this list to ever tie this record. The next time this record was touched was a whole 44 years later on a September 5th, 2013 game where Broncos Hall of Fame quarterback Peyton Manning had a Week 1 showcase against the defending Super Bowl champion Baltimore Ravens en route to a breaking record season of 55 passing touchdowns. This is still the single season record to this day, and it's been about 9 seasons since, and we've seen some great quarterbacks come onto the scene with some great seasons. Mahomes, Rodgers, and a ton others had high 40s, 50 seasons. Breeze had some great seasons, Brady, but none of them are yet to break this passing touchdown record. And on top of that, the very first week of the 2013 season, Manning scored 7 touchdowns in this game. Coming into the season, Manning had many doubts about if he was still elite and record-setting like he had been in his decade-long career with the Indianapolis Colts, after a neck injury had sidelined him in 2011 and eventually had both parties move on to new chapters. But Manning put all doubters to rest on this night and started his run to one of the greatest, if not the greatest, quarterback season in the history of the National Football League. In 2018, the Philadelphia Eagles went on an unheard of run when their superstar MVP caliber quarterback Carson Wentz was lost for the entirety of the rest of the season. Through 13 games, they had been 11-2 and the best in the National Football League, and all hope for Philly seemed to be lost. That was until their last hope, Nick Foles, the backup quarterback, one of the greatest run ever seen by a backup QB. He absolutely teared through the NFC on the way to a Super Bowl win against the Patriots, where he dominated, throwing for 373 yards and 3 touchdowns, going on to win Super Bowl MVP. But many people already knew that. But what many people don't know is he always had elite quarterback play in him. In 2013, his second year in the NFL, Nick Foles, still with the Eagles, back then, 2013, was playing under Chip Kelly. Many know Chip Kelly for his no-huddle spread offense at Oregon. But Nick Foles in this 2013 had a historic 27 touchdown to only 2 interception season, having one of the most underrated seasons for a quarterback in NFL history, and even having himself a 7 touchdown night against the Oakland Raiders. But the craziest part of this magical season and story is that Foles had the 7 touchdowns with 4 minutes remaining in the third quarter. Meaning, he did all of this in about 40 minutes of game time, and most likely would have broken this record without the intention to if he had kept playing. But if he had played with the intention of scoring again to break the record, he might have even had as many as 10. But at the end of the day, he was the close to breaking this record, and he's very underrated all time. A lot of people already know his story about 2018, how he won the historic run, but he's always been an elite caliber player. He just needed to be in the right offense The last man to tie this record of 7 passing touchdowns is Drew Bree, the legendary future Hall of Fame quarterback, who did this in a crazy shootout of a game in 2015 versus the Giants, and had what could easily be argued as the best game for a quarterback through the air in NFL history, as he threw for a wild 511 passing yards and 7 passing touchdowns. On the day, which are quite literally better than the stats of some backup quarterbacks. Throughout an entire NFL season, Breeze and the Saints win the closest game out of any of these 7 touchdown games by far, winning in a nail-biter in Superdome in New Orleans by 3 in a 52-49 classic game 7 years ago. A lot of people are talking about Cooper Rush and stuff like that this year, but to think that Peyton Manning in one game was able to put up more stats than most backup QBs, barring injury, put up in even 2 years sometimes is mind-boggling. And Drew Brees is one of the most legendary quarterbacks in NFL history, and him being tied with Peyton Manning and many others for this record, and the one to be the last person to do it, is very fitting. This record is still one of the biggest records that has not been broken yet, as Luckman said it 79 years ago, and the last time it was even tied was 7 years ago in 2015. Since then, incredible young quarterbacks have come into the NFL like Mahomes, Allen, Herbert, Lamar, and many more, all who have had record-setting games. And there was even a 6-touchdown record-setting game, not quite but almost record-setting game, this season by Tua Tagovailoa versus the Ravens in Week 2. So there's almost no doubt in my mind that this record will be broken in the near future. But at this point, this is still the craziest record in NFL history. So many insane stories, so many different types of careers by these quarterbacks. But at the end of the day, they're all immortalized with the greatest single game performances throughout the air in the history of the NFL. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like, comment, and subscribe. I'm going to be trying getting consistent on this channel, but yeah, if you enjoyed the video, leave a like, comment, subscribe. I'm out of here. Ellie out.